Should my child participate in a clinical trial? What are they for? What's the benefit? Am I going to get paid for that? Is my child going to get better faster? How do these things work? Well, it turns out the U.S. Food and Drug Administration has a new article out on this, which we have up on the iPad. Should your child participate in a clinical trial? I think a lot of times as parents, and I have a bunch of kids myself, as parents, we think to ourselves, especially when our child is in danger, we think if I can just get them to the doctor, everything will be okay. The doctor knows what to do. Well, it turns out as parents, I think sometimes we need to wake up and realize that decisions have to be made, and the doctor can't make all of those decisions. They don't always know exactly what is in our child's best interest. And FDA is actually calling our attention to that in this article. The picture here of the teddy bear, of course, with the mask and the stethoscope, getting great care from one of our many healthcare practitioners, and that's really fun. But here's what it is. What is it? What is a clinical trial? Well, if your child enrolls in a pediatric clinical trial, they could be offered an experimental product that may or may not be better than those already being used. Now, they're more focused than ever on the potential clinical benefit, that justifies the risk of using the experimental product. It's possible to do a clinical trial without any benefit. If you just want to know, is this acceptable? Is it tolerable? But in general, with children, we don't allow that. There's really supposed to be a benefit for the use of the device. In addition, the children who participate generally must have the disease or condition being studied. Now, what we'll see is that there's exceptions to all of these things, which means that, and remember this, these are voluntary. Clinical trials are voluntary. You do not have to participate in a clinical trial. Under limited circumstances, children may be exposed to the risks of an experimental medical product that doesn't offer any potential clinical benefit, but it's got to be low risk. And the information to be gained must be important to understanding or treating the children's disease or condition. That sounds great. That sounds like the right principle. That sounds like we're doing exactly the right thing here. And at a high level, I think we are. Our kids are precious, and we want to make sure that we're taking good care of them and not doing experimentation without potential benefit, without information. Now, of course, informed consent is required in all clinical trials, but in this case especially, it's important that the parents know what is happening here. But I want to draw your attention to this. This kind of language, while it is aspirational, I can tell you as a medical product developer, when we encounter the need for testing and the need for clinical testing, things are never quite as clear as you'd like to think it is. If you have engineers and doctors working on something, they must know exactly what's going on. They must have this perfect sense of it. And of course, that's not true. So when a trial is designed, it's done hopefully in good faith and with best practices. But the reason that FDA is drawing attention to this is because they recognize that not everything is as cut and dried as it seems. So why even allow clinical trials on children? Why not just say, do it on adults? Well, in large part, unfortunately, that's what we have in this country is a lot of adult devices being used on pediatrics. And as we're going to talk about later on today's show, this is not always a good thing because devices that are safe and effective on adults could be dangerous on peds or vice versa. So by necessity, as it says here, FDA says here, doctors may routinely treat children with a drug or a device that's been studied in adults and approved for adult use, but may not have been studied in children, or may have been studied in a different group of children. The demographics that you study are really, really important. So as it turns out, clinical trials in children can be important for increasing safety and availability of products to children whom today might be being treated with adult devices that really are not suited for them or designed for them. FDA has this advice for parents. And again, nothing here, medical or legal advice from us, but this is directly out of FDA's mouth. Ask questions. Write down a list of questions and take it with you when you meet the investigator in charge of the clinical trial. Some examples include, what's the evidence that the investigational product might help my child? If this might not help your child, why would you be doing it? How will you check to see if the investigational product is working? How are you going to know if this is working? Are there any concerns that the investigational product could be unsafe? Maybe you want to ask what kind of safety testing has been done on the device to date. How closely will my child be monitored if there are problems? Who do I call if I'm concerned that there is a problem? Now, this is a topic I'm going to bring up, and I want to bring it up very carefully, because in no way do we want to throw the practitioners and the investigators in our wonderful hospitals and healthcare systems under the bus at all. So many of them are laboring in conditions that sometimes we cannot imagine to care for us and for our children. I've met so many researchers in our career who are passionate about finding better solutions. They see sometimes how barbaric what we do in hospitals can be, and they want to make it better. And that's what drives good clinical research. That's what drives good product development. But it is true that investigators have a built-in conflict of interest. They're interested in seeing their study through. Patient enrollment is often a challenging thing. And it could be, I'm not saying it is in every case, but it could be a temptation to gloss over some of these things. Now, the Institutional Review Board is responsible to make sure that informed consent happens. So it should be happening. This is not meant as a scare tactic at all. But FDA is telling us, talk to the investigator. Talk to the investigator in charge. Get yourself satisfied. Now, of course, as a medical device developer, I don't really want to say anything that's going to dissuade you from participating in a clinical trial. Because if we have a device that we're trying to get to market, I'd really like it to make it through clinical trials. But it remains, this is a voluntary activity. You as a parent need to believe that this clinical trial is going to help your child, that it provides a reasonable boost, that your time and the effort that you're spending to participate in it is really going to provide some potential benefit to your child and going to help research and going to help people down the road. That's really the upside for everybody. Take notes during the discussion. Can I tell you what I think this is about, and you tell me if I'm right or not? The read back. I think we should all do more of this. Can I tell you what I think this is about, and you tell me if I'm right or not? FDA is recommending this. Talk to your investigator. Tell them, I think this is what I heard. Did I get it right? Ask for contact information for other parents whose children are participating in the trial. Take your time. Don't just let somebody shove a document in your face. This is not legal advice, but as a parent, we've encountered this many times. Here's a bunch of documents. Please sign them. You have to do this to get care. Well, that's usually not quite true. Follow your instincts. If you're not satisfied, don't enroll your child. This isn't our advice. This is what FDA is telling you. Clinical trials are voluntary. You can enroll, you can drop out. Although I will say if you have to drop out, it can be a detriment to the study. So it's good to have your questions answered as much as possible up front. It's important to talk to the study team. You may need to follow up just to make sure there aren't any side effects from the investigational product. FDA has gone so far about a year ago as to produce a draft guidance for the ethical considerations for clinical investigations of medical products involving children. And I applaud them for taking this step. I think what you're going to see, though, is that this is why FDA is saying, hey, parents, ask questions, satisfy yourself, make sure your child is being taken care of in a way that you are happy with. Because some of these things, while they're aspirational and they are the right thing to be saying, sometimes it feels like you could drive a truck through them. How do we know if we're really asking the right questions in a trial? We're doing it in good faith. But maybe it's not right for you and for your family. There's various parts of the Code of Federal Regulations, we won't look at all of them, that apply to this. Clinical investigations not involving greater than minimal risk. No greater than minimal risk. And later on, they define what that means. And adequate provisions for soliciting the assent of the children and the permission of their parents or guardians. That's a requirement. That's an ethical consideration. Ensconced in 21 CFR 50.51. There are provisions for clinical investigations involving greater than minimal risk, but the prospect of direct benefit, which means that if you're going to have a little more risk and just a little more risk, as you find out later in the guidance document, it's okay, but there better really be some benefit to it. The prospect of direct benefit, the risk represents a minor increase over minimal risk. They do define that later, but as you can see, that might be a little bit easy to fudge. So it's important that you as a parent understand what they believe the risk of the device or the drug is. The intervention or procedure presents experiences to subjects that are reasonably commensurate with those inherent in their actual or expected medical, dental, physiological, social, or educational situations. You don't want to put people way out of their way. The intervention or procedure is likely to yield generalizable knowledge about the subject's disorder or condition that's of vital importance for the understanding or amelioration of the subject's disorder or condition. That, as a principle, absolutely agree. As a principle, I think our researchers and our doctors agree. But I will say, what does vital importance mean? Is it really vital to you as a parent? Is it vital to them as a researcher? Is it truly vital, or is it a convenient thing to do? All of these factors come into play when you're designing a clinical trial. And so you as a parent want to ensure that you're comfortable with what's happening. Adequate provisions for soliciting the assent of the children and the permission of their parents or guardians. They should have data. You should be able to ask questions about it. There's also a principle of scientific necessity. Now, there was something called the Belmont Report, specifically that of justice, the ethical principles of that, specifically the principle of justice. IRBs should consider the scientific necessity of conducting a clinical investigation in children. You might want to consider that prior to assessing benefit and risk. They shouldn't be enrolled unless you need it to answer an important scientific question. Because if you could do it in adults and that would be sufficient and you could answer the question in adults, you shouldn't be enrolling children. But like we said at the outset, there are so many devices where they're actually using adult devices in children. They know it's not the best thing that they could be doing. And so people go out there and they try to develop devices for use in children, wanting to bring the best care to our children, then needing to test them on children. It's appropriate. In the right context, it can be safe. And the real question there is, hey parent, you're part of this process. It's voluntary. Something that you can say yes or no to. Make sure that you're asking questions to where you're satisfied so you can be an enthusiastic participant in clinical trials that are going to make pediatric devices safer for our children. Now, this isn't just for the parents. I happen to be both a parent and someone who works in the medical device development field. And I'll tell you, as device developers who are targeting pediatric devices, our job is hard enough as it is. Pediatric devices usually have very small markets. They're often worked on as passion projects because somebody lost a loved one because the device wasn't available, or because a caregiver just can't stand to see what patients, pediatric patients, are being put through day after day, and they want to see something better. But as a result, we need to be cognizant of some of these extra limitations. We can't just go into a clinical trial thinking that the normal rules of clinical trials apply, because pediatric patients have an extra standard of care associated with clinical trials that they're involved in. So as device developers, we need to think, if we're going to design a clinical trial using pediatric patients, do we really need the information that we're looking for? Could we get it some other way? There will be extra roadblocks. And we want to make sure that those devices get out there to the patients that they're intended to care for. But we don't want to miss some of the hurdles that are there as a part of these regulations and guidances, and really just common sense. We want to make sure that we're not putting kids under situations where there's not a lot of potential for tangible benefit. If you like what you just heard, please like and subscribe on YouTube. We love our listeners and we love the interactions we've been getting on MedTech Crossroads. As always, we want to save you time on your MedTech development journey. That's why MedTech Crossroads is here. Please let us know how we can make it better. Thanks for being with us today.